The transport ship carrying the human delegation emerged from the jump gate with practiced precision. Elena Vasquez stood at the observation window, watching as the Galactic Council chamber came into view. The massive structure hung in space like a jewel, orbiting a neutron star whose light painted everything in shades of blue and silver. After 30 years of diplomatic service, the sight still took her breath away. "Chief Diplomat will be docking in 15 minutes, her aide Marcus said from behind her. His voice carried a nervous edge that Elena had learned to recognize over their 5 years working together. She turned from the window, smoothing down her formal diplomatic uniform. The dark fabric bore Earth's emblem on the shoulder, a simple blue circle that somehow looked small and insignificant compared to the elaborate symbols worn by other species. "Have we received the agenda for today's session?" Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation told Elena everything she needed to know. "It's listed as a special tribunal. No other details provided." Elena's jaw tightened, but her expression remained calm. In 3 decades of galactic diplomacy, she had learned that showing concern was the same as showing weakness. The older races watched for any sign that humanity was unprepared, unsuited for the cosmic stage they now walked upon. The docking process was smooth. As Elena and her team of 6 diplomats made their way through the pristine corridors of the council chamber, they passed dozens of other species. Some were humanoid, others were so alien that human minds struggled to process their forms. A Kelvorian diplomat, its gas form contained in a crystalline suit, drifted past without acknowledgement. A Cathrin representative, all scales and multiple eyes, actively turned away as the humans approached. "They're not even looking at us," whispered Jennifer, one of the junior diplomats. "They're looking," Elena replied quietly. "They're just making sure we know they disapprove of what they see." The main chamber was vast enough to make cathedrals seem small. Tiered seating rose in concentric circles, each level representing different ages of civilizations. The lowest tier, closest to the central speaking floor, belonged to the ancients, those species who had achieved spaceflight before humans had even developed agriculture. The highest tier, so far up that atmosphere processors were needed, held the newest members. Humanity's seats were on the second highest tier. Elena led her delegation to their assigned places. The seats were designed for humanoid forms at least, which was more courtesy than some species received. She had once witnessed an aquatic species forced to remain in a small tank for an entire session because no one had bothered to install proper accommodations. The chamber filled slowly. Representatives from 847 civilizations took their places. The noise should have been deafening, but sophisticated acoustic systems managed the sound, creating a low hum that felt almost peaceful. Elena knew better. She could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. A crystalline tone rang through the chamber, calling the session to order. The Zintharian High Chancellor materialized on the central platform. The being was pure energy contained in a lattice of exotic matter, its form shifting through colors that human eyes couldn't properly name. It had existed for over 40,000 years, had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and regarded most species the way humans might regard mayflies. "This council is called to address a matter of urgent importance," the Chancellor's voice echoed. Somehow speaking in every language simultaneously, "We gather to discuss the human problem." Elena felt her team stiffen around her, but she kept her face neutral. Marcus started to speak, but she silenced him with a slight gesture. "Humanity has been part of our galactic community for 30 of their years," the Chancellor continued. "In that brief time, they have demonstrated patterns that concern the elder members of this council. We have observed rapid expansion, aggressive militarization, and a concerning disregard for established protocols." A Drachni representative rose from the 3rd tier, its reptilian form towering even at a distance. "The humans have settled 40 systems in 3 decades. They breed like vermin and spread across the stars with no consideration for the careful balance we have maintained." Another voice joined in, this one belonging to a Sylth, beings of living metal who communicated through harmonic resonances. "Their military buildup is unprecedented for a species so young. They construct weapons and warships as though preparing for conquest." More voices added to the chorus of complaints. The humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too willing to ignore the social hierarchies that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. They asked too many questions. demanded too much access to advanced technologies, and worst of all, they refused to accept their place as a junior species that should spend centuries learning before being given any real authority. Elena listened to it all, her face a mask of diplomatic calm. Inside, she was cataloging every complaint, every accusation, preparing her response. But she also felt something else, a cold anger that she had learned to keep buried deep. The session went on for hours. Species that had never spoken to humans before stood to voice their concerns. Some were genuine, worried about the pace of human expansion. Others were clearly motivated by fear, afraid that this young, dynamic species might upset the comfortable order they had enjoyed for so long. Finally, the Zintharian Chancellor called for silence. The chamber fell quiet. 847 civilizations, waiting for the judgment of the ancients. It is the position of the Elder Council that humanity represents a potential threat to galactic stability, the Chancellor announced. We propose the following: that humanity be restricted to their home system, that their faster-than-light capabilities be revoked, and that they be placed under monitored quarantine until such time as they have evolved beyond their savage nature. The chamber erupted. Some species cheered, others murmured in discussion. A few, very few, remained silent in what might have been disapproval. Elena sat perfectly still. Around her, her team was in shock. Marcus had gone pale, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Jennifer looked like she might be sick. The others ranged from angry to terrified. The Chancellor raised a hand and silence fell again. The human delegation will be given an opportunity to respond before we vote on this proposal. Chief Diplomat Vasquez, you may approach the speaking floor. Elena stood slowly. She felt the weight of thousands of eyes on her, some curious, most dismissive. As she made her way down the tiers toward the central platform, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The colony wars on Mars where she had lost her parents. The formation of the United Earth government. First contact with the Kelvorians. Humanity's desperate struggle to prove themselves worthy of joining the galactic community. She thought about every insult, every condescending word, every door closed in humanity's face. She thought about Thermopylae Station, where 17,000 humans had died buying time for council forces that arrived too late. She thought about the Kelvorian plague, where human doctors had worked around the clock to save millions of aliens, using technology they barely understood. She reached the central platform and stood beneath the gaze of the Zintharian Chancellor. The being pulsed with colors that suggested curiosity and contempt in equal measure. You may speak, it said. Elena took a breath, looked up at the tiers of alien civilizations, and began to formulate the response that would change everything. Elena stood on the central platform, but her mind was suddenly elsewhere. She was 7 years old again, standing in the observation dome of New Houston Colony on Mars, watching the sky burn. The colony wars had reached her home, and the ships overhead were firing on each other with weapons that turned the thin Martian atmosphere into streams of fire. Her mother had pulled her away from the window, but not before Elena saw the transport ship explode. That ship had been carrying her father, returning from the ice mines. She remembered her mother's scream, remembered the way the world seemed to stop making sense. Chief Diplomat? The Chancellor's voice brought her back to the present. She had been silent for only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. She nodded, gathering her thoughts. The memories weren't a distraction. They were essential. They were why she was here. Thank you for the opportunity to respond, Elena said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. Before I address the Council's proposal, I would like to share something about myself, about where I come from. She could feel the confusion rippling through the assembled species. This wasn't how diplomatic responses typically began. Good. She needed them off balance. I was born on Mars during what we call the colony wars. Humanity had just begun to settle our neighboring planets, and we nearly destroyed ourselves in the process. Different nations, different ideologies, all fighting over resources and territory. My father died in those wars. So did millions of others. Elena paused, letting that sink in. I mention this because I want you to understand that I have no illusions about humanity's capacity for violence. I have seen it firsthand. I have lived through it. I carry the scars of it even now. The chamber was quiet. Some species were leaning forward, interested despite themselves. The colony wars ended not because we suddenly became enlightened, but because the Kelvorians made first contact. Your ships appeared in our solar system, and humanity realized something terrifying. We were not alone, and we were fighting each other, while unknown forces watched from the stars. We formed the United Earth government in 6 months. We put aside centuries of conflict because survival demanded it. She began to walk slowly across the platform, her movements deliberate. Since that day 30 years ago, humanity has worked tirelessly to prove ourselves worthy of joining this council. We have followed every law, completed every requirement, passed every test you placed before us, and at every step, we have faced the same condescension, the same dismissal, the same prejudice that I see in this chamber today. Marcus, watching from the high tier, felt his heart pounding. He had never heard Elena speak like this in a formal session. She was breaking every rule of diplomatic protocol. You accuse us of rapid expansion, Elena continued. Let me provide some context. The Xantharians, in their first century of faster-than-light travel, claimed 400 systems. The historical records are quite clear on this. The Catherine Collective conquered 1,200 systems in their expansion phase. The Drachni Empire was built on the systematic displacement of 17 other species. She turned to face the tiers directly. Humanity has settled 40 systems in 30 years. Every single one was either purchased through legal trade, negotiated through diplomatic channels, or granted to us by this very council. We have not fired a single shot in aggression against any council member. If our diplomacy is effective, if our expansion is successful, perhaps that speaks to our evolution rather than our savagery. A Drachni representative started to object, but the Chancellor silenced them with a gesture. The ancient being wanted to hear where this was going. Elena's voice grew stronger. You say we militarize too aggressively. You mock our fleets, our weapons, our defense networks. So let me tell you about Thermopylae Station. The name hung in the air. Some species shifted uncomfortably. They knew this story. 20 years ago, the krill swarm emerged from dark space. They had no language, no interest in diplomacy. They only consumed. They attacked the peripheral colonies without warning, and the death toll was catastrophic. The Council, in its wisdom, called an emergency session to discuss the appropriate response. Elena's tone dripped with barely controlled anger. That session lasted 6 months. 6 months of debate and discussion and careful consideration. Meanwhile, the krill devoured colony after colony, killing millions. Humanity watched this happen for 6 days before we decided we couldn't wait any longer. We mobilized our fleet without council approval and moved to intercept the swarm. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Our ships reached Thermopylae Station 3 days before the krill did. We evacuated every civilian we could find from every species. Then we held the line. For 3 weeks, human warships fought the swarm with everything we had, buying time for the council forces to finish their discussions and finally arrive to help. Marcus remembered those weeks. He had been a young officer then, barely out of training, assigned to coordinate supply runs to the fleet. He remembered the casualty reports coming in, the lists of names growing longer each day. 17,000 humans died at Thermopylae Station, Elena said quietly. 17,000 men and women who gave their lives protecting colonies that weren't even ours, saving species who had shown us nothing but contempt. And when it was over, when the council forces finally arrived and drove off the swarm, do you know what humanity received? She looked up at the tiers. A formal citation for unauthorized military deployment. Not thanks, not recognition, a citation, a mark on our record that we had acted without proper authorization. The chamber was utterly silent now. Even those who had been loudest in their condemnation seemed unable to respond. So when you say we militarize too aggressively, I want you to understand what you're really saying. You're saying that we should have waited. We should have let millions die while you debated. We should have followed protocol while entire civilizations burned. That is what you mean by appropriate behavior for a young species. Elena turned back to the Chancellor. You say we haven't evolved beyond our savage nature. Let me tell you what that nature really is. She thought about her childhood again, about the aftermath of the colony wars. She had been placed in a refugee center with hundreds of other orphans. There hadn't been enough food, enough medicine, enough of anything. She remembered the adults who had worked there, who had given their own rations to the children, who had stayed up all night caring for the sick and injured. Humanity is the species that created weapons capable of destroying our entire world. We built missiles that could end all life on Earth in a matter of hours. And then, at the height of our Cold War, When tensions were highest and destruction seemed inevitable, we chose not to use them. We negotiated. We compromised. We stepped back from the brink. She could see some species exchanging glances, processing this information. We are the species that committed terrible atrocities throughout our history. We enslaved each other. We committed genocide. We destroyed our own environment in pursuit of short-term gains. These are facts. I will not deny them. Elena's voice grew softer but somehow more powerful. But we are also the species that felt shame for those actions. We built international laws to prevent future atrocities. We created courts to judge war crimes. We established universal declarations of human rights. We taught our children about our mistakes so they would never be repeated. We built monuments to our victims and promised to remember. She spread her hands. How many species in this chamber can say the same? How many of you have had to overcome your own worst instincts? How many of you achieved spaceflight through struggle rather than through peaceful evolution? The question hung in the air unanswered. Because the truth was, most species in the galactic community had never faced existential conflict. They had developed slowly, peacefully, reaching the stars without the violent crucible that had forged humanity. Elena could feel the shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The comfortable certainty that had filled the room when she first stood to speak was cracking. Some species were listening now, really listening, perhaps for the first time in 30 years of human presence on the council. You want to understand humanity? Elena said, her voice carrying a weight that made even the ancients pay attention. Then understand this fundamental truth. We are not peaceful because we never learned to fight. We are peaceful because we fought, won, and then chose to lay down our weapons. These are not the same thing. She began to pace again, her movements measured and deliberate. Most species in this chamber achieved spaceflight through gradual evolution. You had no world wars, no weapons of mass destruction, no moments where your entire civilization hung on the edge of extinction. You reached the stars innocent and naive, never having faced the darkness within yourselves. A Sylph representative interrupted, its harmonic voice resonating through the chamber. You speak as though violence is something to be proud of, as though your history of warfare makes you superior. No, Elena said firmly. I speak as though overcoming violence is something meaningful. There is no virtue in never being tested. You were never peaceful by choice. You were peaceful because aggression was never part of your nature. Humanity chooses peace every single day, despite every instinct that whispers otherwise. She stopped and faced the tears directly. 8 billion humans wake up every morning and choose cooperation over competition, choose dialogue over conflict, choose peace when violence would be easier. That is what it means to be human. Not the absence of dark impulses, but the constant, deliberate choice to overcome them. The Zintharian chancellor pulsed with colors that suggested deep thought. You claim moral superiority based on resisting impulses that other species never possessed. This is illogical. Is it? Elena challenged. Tell me, Chancellor, in your 40,000 years of existence, have you ever been truly tempted by something you knew was wrong? Have you ever wanted something so badly that you had to fight against yourself to do the right thing? The being hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. I thought not, Elena said. You are ancient and wise, but you have never struggled with your own nature. You have never had to become better than you were. You simply are what you are, unchanging and eternal. She turned to address the chamber at large. Humanity is different. We are not static. We evolve not just biologically, but morally, ethically, philosophically. Every generation of humans has had to grapple with questions of right and wrong, had to define themselves against the darkness of what they could become. Marcus watched from the high tier, barely breathing. Other human diplomats around him were equally transfixed. This wasn't just a defense of humanity. It was a challenge to the entire foundation of galactic civilization. You accuse us of not knowing our place, Elena continued. But let me ask you something. Why should we accept a place that was assigned to us by those who got here first? You call this a council, but it's really a hierarchy frozen in time. The ancients at the bottom, closest to power. The youngest species, at the top, so far away they can barely participate. And that distance is not just physical. She gestured to the tiered seating. How many major decisions has this council made in the last 1,000 years where a young species had any meaningful input? How many times have the ancients actually listened to perspectives from those of us who see the universe differently? Silence. The answer was obvious to everyone. You maintain order by maintaining control, Elena said. You have built a system where advancement takes centuries, where young species must spend generations proving themselves worthy before they're granted access to knowledge and resources. You call it wisdom. I call it something else. The chamber erupted in outrage. Multiple species began shouting at once, their translators creating a cacophony of protest. The chancellor called for order, but it took several minutes before the noise subsided. When quiet finally returned, Elena continued as if nothing had happened. Since joining this council, humanity has followed every rule you've placed before us. We have paid every fee, completed every trial, accepted every limitation. We have been patient beyond measure. And still you look at us with contempt. She pulled out a small data pad and displayed information on the chamber's main screens. These are the formal requests humanity has made to the Council over 30 years. Requests for trade agreements, technology sharing, cultural exchange programs, joint research initiatives. 5,347 requests in total. The numbers appeared on screens throughout the chamber. Do you know how many were approved without significant delays or modifications? 73, less than 2%. The average time for approval of a simple trade agreement is 8 years. The average time when a senior species makes the same request is 6 weeks. Species throughout the chamber were studying the data, unable to dispute the facts. This is not governance, Elena said. This is gatekeeping. You have built a system designed to keep young species in their place, to maintain the power structure that benefits those who arrived first. And now, when humanity has succeeded despite these obstacles, when we have thrived despite your barriers, you want to quarantine us, to strip away our achievements, to force us back into a box where you feel comfortable. The Drachni representative rose again, its voice booming. You dare to insult this council? To question the wisdom of civilizations that existed when your species was still living in caves? I question a system that values age over merit, Elena shot back. I question leaders who fear change more than they value justice. And yes, I question the wisdom of civilizations that have learned nothing new in 10,000 years because they're too busy protecting their position at the top. The chamber exploded again, but this time Elena didn't wait for silence. She raised her voice, and somehow it cut through the chaos. You want to quarantine humanity? To strip us of faster-than-light travel? To treat us like dangerous children who need to be locked away? Her voice dropped to something cold and hard, something that carried the weight of 8 billion humans standing behind her. Then let me be absolutely clear about what happens next. The chamber fell silent, shocked by the change in her tone. We are not asking for your approval. We are not requesting your permission. We have followed your laws, met your requirements, paid every price you demanded. If you move against us now, it will not be justice. It will be tyranny. And humanity has a very long, very storied history of responding to tyranny. The words hung in the air like a threat and a promise. Species throughout the chamber were exchanging worried glances. A few were accessing historical databases, learning for the first time about human revolutions, about resistance movements, about the countless times throughout history when humans had overthrown those who sought to oppress them. I am not threatening war, Elena clarified. I am stating a fact. If you make humanity your enemy, you will learn what it means to face a species that has spent its entire existence fighting, not against others, but against the universe itself, against our own nature, against impossible odds. We are very, very good at surviving. She took a breath, letting the tension build. But it doesn't have to be that way. We came here seeking partnership, not conflict. We have offered cooperation at every turn. The question before this council is not whether humanity deserves a place here. We have earned that right 10 times over. The question is whether you are wise leaders maintaining order, or frightened elders desperately suppressing anyone who reminds you that the universe doesn't owe you dominance. The Zintharian chancellor, pulsed with colors that suggested anger and something else, uncertainty perhaps, You speak boldly for someone whose species hangs in judgment. I speak honestly, Elena replied, which is more than I can say for a council that claims to value all species equally while maintaining a system designed to preserve inequality. She turned to face the full chamber, her voice softening slightly. I know many of you fear change. I know the idea of humanity rising too quickly threatens the comfortable order you've known. But ask yourselves this: is your fear of change worth condemning an entire species? Is your desire for control worth making an enemy of those who could be your greatest allies? Elena walked slowly back to the center of the platform. Vote however you wish. Quarantine us if you must. But know that whatever you decide here today, you are not judging humanity. You are revealing yourselves. Elena stood in the center of the platform surrounded by 847 civilizations and felt a strange calm settle over her. She had gone too far to turn back now. The careful diplomatic dance was over. Now there was only truth. Before you vote, she said, her voice quieter but somehow more commanding, I want to tell you about a human named Sarah Chen. She was a xenobiologist working on the Kelvorian plague 25 years ago. The mention of the plague caused a stir. The Kelvorians were a major power on the Council, and the plague had nearly wiped them out before human scientists found a cure. Dr. Chen worked for 72 hours straight, trying to understand the pathogen. Humanity had barely developed our own biotechnology at that point. We were children, playing with tools we didn't fully understand. But the Kelvorians were dying by the thousands, and no one else was helping. The Council had offered thoughts and prayers, but no actual assistance. Elena pulled up another image on the screens, showing a young human woman with dark circles under her eyes, standing in a laboratory. This is Dr. Chen 4 days into her research. She was working with a disease that could potentially jump to human physiology. Her colleagues begged her to slow down to take precautions, but she could hear the death counts rising every hour. And she couldn't stop. The image changed, showing the same woman lying in a medical bed, her body covered in the distinctive crystalline growths of the Kelvorian plague. On the 5th day, Dr. Chen became infected. The disease had mutated, had found a way to cross species barriers. She knew she was dying. Do you know what she did? The chamber was silent, waiting. She kept working. From her quarantine bed, she analyzed her own symptoms, tracked the progression of the disease in her body, and used that data to refine the cure. She died 6 days later, but her research saved millions of Kelvorian lives. The cure was distributed within a week. Elena looked directly at the Kelvorian delegation. Your people sent a formal thank you note. It was very polite, very proper. But you never acknowledged what Dr. Chen's sacrifice really meant, that a human from a species you considered primitive gave her life to save yours without hesitation. She turned back to the full chamber. That is who we are, not the weapons we build or the ships we deploy, but the choices we make when it matters most. And we make those choices knowing full well that we might not be appreciated, might not even be acknowledged. The Xantharian chancellor spoke, its voice thoughtful. You tell us stories of individual heroism, but individuals do not define a species. We judge you by your collective actions, by your patterns of behavior. Then judge us by this, Elena said. She displayed a new set of data on the screens. These are the statistics from Earth over the past century. Global poverty rates, literacy rates, life expectancy, infant mortality, access to clean water, rates of violent crime. Watch what happens to these numbers over time. The graphs appeared and the trends were unmistakable. Every measure of human well-being showed dramatic improvement. Poverty falling, education rising, violence decreasing, cooperation increasing. 100 years ago, Earth was on the brink of environmental collapse. Our oceans were dying, our atmosphere was poisoned, our forests were disappearing. We had the technology to fix it, but it required every nation to work together, to sacrifice short-term gain for long-term survival. Do you know how many species in this chamber have successfully reversed planet-wide environmental damage through voluntary cooperation? Elena paused. 3 out of 847. Because most species never damage their planets in the first place, or they die before they learn to fix it. Humanity did both. We nearly destroyed our world and then we saved it. Not because we had to, but because we chose to value the future over the present. A younger species, the Mithraxi, spoke up from one of the higher tiers. Their translator made their voice sound uncertain. You speak of humanity as though you are perfect, as though you have solved all problems. But we have seen your news broadcasts, your entertainment. You still have violence, still have inequality, still have conflict. Yes, Elena agreed immediately. We do, and we will continue to have these problems for generations to come. That's not a flaw in my argument, it's the entire point. We are not perfect. We are not finished evolving. We are a work in progress, and we always will be. She walked toward the edge of the platform, looking up at the higher tiers where the younger species sat. Every day humans wake up and face the same choice. We can be selfish or generous, violent or peaceful, closed-minded or curious. And every day billions of humans choose the better path, even when the worst path would be easier. Elena's voice grew passionate. That's what you don't understand about us. You look at our capacity for violence and see savagery. We look at it and see the weight of choice. You have never been tempted to destroy, so your peace cost you nothing. Our peace costs us everything, and we pay that price gladly because we understand what the alternative means. She pulled up images of Earth, showing cities of glass and steel, forests restored, oceans teeming with life. This is a planet that was dying 100 years ago. We saved it not through technology alone, but through choice. Millions of individual choices, made by people who would never see the full results of their sacrifice but made them anyway. The Drachni representative, who had been silent since Elena's earlier rebuke, spoke up. You speak of choice and sacrifice as though they are uniquely human traits. Many species have made difficult decisions for the greater good. I'm sure they have, Elena acknowledged. But how many of those decisions went against your fundamental nature? How many required you to be better than your instincts? That's the difference. When a naturally peaceful species chooses peace, it's not a choice at all. It's simply following their nature. When humanity chooses peace, we are actively overriding our evolutionary programming. She pulled up more data, these showing human brain scans. This is the human amygdala, the part of our brain that processes fear and aggression. It's larger and more active than most species in this chamber. We are literally hardwired for conflict. Every social interaction, every negotiation, every moment of cooperation requires us to consciously override our fight-or-flight responses. The screens showed comparison data from other species. The Kelvorians have minimal amygdala activity. The Sylth don't even have an equivalent structure. The Xantharians don't have biology at all, so the concept doesn't apply. Most species in this chamber are naturally cooperative, naturally peaceful. You don't have to work at it. It's just who you are. Elena's voice grew quiet but intense. Imagine living every moment of your life with a part of your brain screaming at you to fight, to take, to dominate. And then imagine choosing, moment after moment, day after day, to ignore that voice, to build a civilization based on cooperation, despite every instinct telling you to compete. That is the human experience. That is what we overcome every single day. The chamber was absorbing this, many species accessing their own biological databases, confirming what Elena was saying. The younger species in the higher tiers seemed particularly affected, understanding for the first time that humanity's path had been fundamentally different from their own. You want to quarantine us because you fear what we might become, Elena said. But you should fear what happens if you make us your enemy. Not because we are naturally violent, but because we are naturally survivors. We have survived ice ages and plagues, wars and famines, environmental collapse and nuclear brinkmanship. We have survived every challenge our planet and our own nature threw at us. She spread her hands. And we did it not by being the strongest or the smartest, but by being adaptable, by learning, by changing, by becoming something more than we were. That is humanity's true strength, not our weapons or our numbers, but our capacity for transformation. Elena looked directly at the Xantharian Chancellor. You are 40,000 years old, Chancellor. In all that time, how much have you changed? How much have you grown? How much have you learned that contradicted what you thought you knew? The being pulsed with colors that might have been anger or might have been embarrassment. I have accumulated vast knowledge. Knowledge is not the same as growth, Elena replied. Humanity is only 30 years old in galactic terms, but we have transformed ourselves completely in that time. We went from fighting each other over Mars to standing together before this council. We went from fearing the unknown to embracing it. We went from being alone in the universe to being part of something larger than ourselves. That is growth. That is evolution, not biological but conscious, deliberate, purposeful. She took a deep breath. So vote to quarantine us if you must. But understand that you're not protecting the galaxy from humanity. You're protecting yourselves from the uncomfortable truth that being old doesn't make you wise, and being first doesn't make you right. Elena returned to her seat in the high tier, feeling the weight of every eye in the chamber following her. Marcus leaned close and whispered, "That was either brilliant or it just ended humanity's place in the galaxy." "Perhaps both," Elena replied quietly. The Zintharian Chancellor called for the vote. The process was formal and ancient, each species casting their decision through a quantum network that displayed the results in real time. Green lights for maintaining humanity's status, red lights for quarantine. The voting began at the lowest tier, with the ancients. Elena watched as red light after red light appeared. The Zintharians voted red. The Drachni voted red. The Cathran Collective voted red. Species that had existed for millennia, that had shaped galactic civilization, all voted to quarantine humanity. "This is it," Jennifer whispered from Elena's other side. "We're finished." But as the voting moved up through the tiers, something unexpected began to happen. Some of the middle-tier species, those who had joined the council within the last few thousand years, began voting green. Not many, but enough to be noticeable. The Mithraxi voted green. The Pelorians voted green. A dozen others followed. By the time the vote reached the highest tiers, where the youngest species sat, the pattern was clear. Nearly every species that had joined the council in the last millennium voted green. They had listened to Elena's words and recognized their own struggles in humanity's story. They too had faced the condescension of the ancients, the barriers designed to keep them in their place. The final count appeared on the main screen. The vote was close, far closer than anyone had expected. The quarantine proposal had failed by a margin of just 37 votes. The chamber erupted in chaos. Ancient species were outraged, demanding recounts and investigations. Younger species were celebrating or sitting in shocked silence. The middle tiers were a mix of both reactions. Elena sat perfectly still, hardly daring to believe it. They had won. Barely by the slimmest of margins, but they had won. The Chancellor called for order, but it took nearly an hour for the chamber to calm down. When silence finally fell, the ancient being's form pulsed with colors that suggested barely controlled fury. "The vote has been recorded," it announced. "The proposal for quarantine has failed. Humanity will retain its council membership and all associated privileges." The word should have been a victory, but the Chancellor's tone made it clear that something had fundamentally broken in the galactic order. Over the following days and weeks, the ramifications of Elena's speech rippled outward like waves from a dropped stone. The younger species began to meet in informal groups, discussing the points she had raised. They started questioning the systems that had seemed immutable, the hierarchies that had seemed natural. The Mithraxi ambassador requested a private meeting with Elena. They met in a neutral diplomatic lounge, a space designed to accommodate various physiologies. "Your speech has caused quite a stir among my people," the Mithraxi said through their translator. The being looked like a cross between an insect and a plant, with chitinous plates covered in photosynthetic moss. "We have been council members for 800 years, and in all that time we simply accepted that the ancients knew best. It never occurred to us to question why." Elena sipped her tea, considering her words carefully. "And now? Now we are asking questions," the Mithraxi replied. "Why does advancement take so long? Why are the ancients hoarding technology? Why do we accept a system designed to benefit those who got here first?" The being paused. "Your species has been here only 30 years, but you have already accomplished what we never dared to attempt. You challenged the foundation of galactic civilization. We challenged an unjust system," Elena corrected. "There's a difference. Within a month, 17 younger species had formed what they called the Progressive Coalition. They weren't leaving the council, but they were creating their own networks for trade, research, and mutual support. The ancients watched this development with barely concealed alarm. The Zintharian Chancellor requested a private meeting with Elena. She accepted, curious about what the ancient being wanted. They met in a quantum space, where the Chancellor could interact without the limitations of the physical chamber. The being's energy matrix swirled with colors that suggested deep contemplation. "You have disrupted the order we have maintained for over 1,000,000 years," the Chancellor said without preamble. "I spoke the truth," Elena replied. If that disrupts your order, perhaps your order was built on falsehoods. You do not understand what you have done. The stability of galactic civilization depends on respect for hierarchy, for the wisdom of age. Elena shook her head. Stability built on suppression is just slow-motion tyranny. Real stability comes from justice, from systems that work for everyone, not just those at the top. The Chancellor pulsed with colors that might have been anger, or might have been something else. In 40,000 years, I have never been challenged as you challenged me. I have never been made to question my fundamental assumptions about the nature of civilization. And how does that feel? Elena asked softly. There was a long pause. Uncomfortable, frightening, but also... The being hesitated. Interesting. I had forgotten what it was like to encounter something truly new. That's what humanity offers, Elena said. Not weapons or aggression, but perspective. We see the universe differently, because we came to it differently. That difference could be valuable if you let it. The Chancellor was silent for a long time. Finally it spoke again. I want to ask you something, Chief Diplomat. What makes you believe humanity can maintain this peace you have chosen? What happens when your nature overwhelms your choice? When the violence you suppress finally breaks free? Elena had thought about this question countless times over her decades of service. It happens, she admitted. Individuals fail. Groups fall back into old patterns. Violence erupts despite our best efforts. But that's not defeat, it's proof that the choice matters. If peace was our nature, it wouldn't require constant effort. The fact that we have to work at it every day is what makes it meaningful. She leaned forward slightly. We wake up each day and choose again. That's what it means to be human. We fail, we learn, we try again. We are not perfect beings who achieved enlightenment and now coast on that accomplishment. We are imperfect beings who keep trying to be better. Perhaps one day you'll understand that eternal peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the constant choice to overcome it. The Chancellor considered this for a long moment. Your species will change the galaxy, it finally said. I am not certain whether that change will be for better or worse, but it will be profound. Then help us make it better, Elena suggested. Work with us instead of against us. Share your wisdom not as a tool for control, but as a gift to those who come after. That's what true leadership looks like. The being didn't respond, simply fading from the quantum space, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. 6 months after the vote, Elena stood again at the observation window of a transport ship, this time heading back to Earth. The Council had entered a new era, one marked by tension but also by possibility. The ancients had withdrawn into their own inner council, maintaining their distance from the younger species. But they hadn't taken any hostile actions, content to watch and wait. The Progressive Coalition had grown to include 43 species. They were sharing technology, conducting joint research, and building the kind of cooperative networks that the full council should have created millennia ago. Humanity was at the center of this new alliance, not as leaders but as catalysts. Marcus joined her at the window. The reports from Earth are extraordinary. People are celebrating in the streets. We're getting requests for diplomatic exchanges from species who wouldn't even acknowledge us 6 months ago. It's not a complete victory, Elena cautioned. The ancients are still there, still powerful, still afraid of change. This could still go badly, but it could also go well, Marcus countered. For the first time since we joined the council, we have allies. Real allies who see us as equals. Elena nodded, watching the stars drift past. That's all we ever wanted. Not dominance, not special treatment, just a fair chance to prove ourselves. Far below them, Earth rotated peacefully in space, a blue and green world that had nearly destroyed itself, but had chosen survival instead. A world of 8 billion humans, each making their own daily choice between darkness and light. On the bridge, the captain announced that they would be entering Earth's system within the hour. Elena remained at the window, thinking about everything that had happened, everything that might still come. The galaxy had trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. Something new had entered the cosmic stage, something that couldn't be controlled or suppressed. Humanity had earned its place not through ancient heritage or natural pacifism, but through the hardest path of all, conscious, deliberate, relentless self-improvement. The stars watched as they always had, indifferent and eternal. But among those stars, in ships and stations and colonies scattered across hundreds of systems, beings of countless species were asking new questions, challenging old assumptions, and imagining different futures. Elena smiled slightly, pressing her hand against the window. They had changed the galaxy, but the work was just beginning.